So now we're going to discuss The Courage of Sarah Noble, which is it's a longer book than Prairie School. It's a great book. It's about a little girl who goes with her father as they travel to a new place to build a new home. And again, this is early American life. This is totally different than what our students are used to. They generally don't have to leave their family behind, go with their father, and build a house.
Through the wilderness. On foot.
That's
but this
right.
is a true story.
But it's a true story.
In the author's note, yeah.
It's a true story. But it's also different than Prairie School. You know, Prairie School is out on the prairie in Colorado. This is still in New England, and it's earlier, I believe, than Prairie School. And so now you're dealing with, whereas Prairie School is all about learning how to read in a new place, The Courage of Sarah Noble is really about traveling through what seems like dangerous forests to get to a new place and to build a home, and what it looks like to actually construct a home in a new area. So what are some of the major themes that you guys see in this?
I think you just talked about one.
Yeah.
Courage is all through this because Sarah is afraid a lot. And she's nervous because she's left her mother and her siblings. And she's basically come to help take care of her father. She's 8 years old.
She's 8, right.
And she's going on this, this is how hard life was in 1707. So she's going as an 8-year-old child, taking on the responsibility of cooking for her father.
Because he can't do it. He's building a house, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so she goes off with him, and then he ends up having to leave her to go back to get the rest of the family and bring them. And she's afraid of the wild animals, afraid of the dark of the uncivilized forest. But she learns, that's the title of the book, The Courage of Sarah Noble. She learns courage, but there are so many things, like her father says to her, to be afraid and to be brave is the best courage of all. That is a great line. That, that notion that a second grader may not have ever thought of before, that it's okay to be afraid.
Yeah.
And that there's no such thing really as courage without fear, because that's where courage comes from, is overcoming your fear. And they don't do anything unreasonable at all, but it is reasonable for her to be afraid of wolves at night.
Right.
It's a real insecurity.
Well, and her father stays awake the whole night. Like it says that she eventually fell asleep, but he didn't.
And
because he knows that there's real danger.
That's right. And that's another theme throughout here, is the worry of a parent for their child that I don't think children think about. They don't. I remember when I went off to college, and when my children went, off to college, it was, it's a traumatic, that senior year of high school is traumatic. When I went off to college, it never crossed my mind that my parents could be sad, or I was so happy and so ready to go. And it's just something we don't think of. We just don't realize the burden of parenthood, which maybe is a good thing. But I do think that is clear in this book and should be pointed out to young children, that her father took her into a very dangerous place because of necessity. He had to do it. But that didn't mean he wasn't afraid for her, or every minute not on guard that she be protected.
But also to counter that, there were often things that her fear was born of what ifs. And isn't that true of all fear? So often it's the uncertainty, it's the what if question. There's a great quote from Mark Twain, which is, I've lived through so many terrible things, and some of them actually happened, right? And so you endure, you endure the fear and the worry, and, it's sort of the pain of experiences that you just have concocted in your mind. And I think it's really interesting to see her sort of progress in terms of her ability to deal with that fear and to use reason and to explain, at the very beginning, the first night when, she hears these sounds and her father says, well, Sarah, that's an owl and he's speaking to you. And this is and this is a deer and this is a wolf. Now the wolf is actually fearful. And then later in the night, she hears the sounds and she's consoling herself and she's explaining away these things herself because she has learned and she is not letting the fear take over. And so she has learned to sort of deal with those fears independently by using reason and explanation and information to calm some of the fears. And so I think you can see that progression throughout. And in all of these books, just pointing out that a lot of times fear is, there are real dangers and real worries, but a lot of times, the Moffats, Jane does this all the time in the Moffats. We just build these stories in our minds and we're living through, drama that's not really happening.
Exactly.
Right. And may not happen.
Right.
And so, but that leads us, I think, to another theme is Sarah is a little girl of faith.
Right.
Mm.
And she does rely on prayer and on her faith in God to help alleviate her fears and make her feel better about what's going on in her life.
Yes.
And so that's a big, nice theme here. And I love the where she talks about the story of Samuel and how that's one of her favorite stories in the Bible because God literally talks to Samuel. And so it would be really nice if God talked to her.
Yeah.
But she does. She's in a situation where she feels fear and she says, God will tell me what to do. And then in the next sentence it says she knew exactly what to do. And so, she is depending on that faith and in that prayer and communication with God. And he is speaking to her, if not audibly, right? And so I think you're exactly right that faith is such a necessary counterpoint to fear.
Right.
That, we are all called to do things that we feel unprepared to do or, but we have to go on faith.
Well, and I think that is definitely touching another theme, which I think is making wise choices in the midst of uncertainty. We live in a world where we're teaching our children, you need to do this, you need not to do that. But as they get older, they're going to realize that situations are not perfect, that they have to make a choice in the midst of an imperfect situation and use the best information that they have. And we see that with her father, who when he needs to go back and get his family, he doesn't know should he take Sarah Noble or not. And he chooses to let her stay with a friend. And that took courage on his part and took faith on his part to make that choice in the midst of uncertainty.
And it took courage for Sarah to be left behind.
That's right.
And without any of her family at all. But she did end up with a family that loved her and took care of her. And she ended up with new friendships.
That's right. So that same theme, the theme of staying in another's home, we see that towards the beginning of the novel as they're moving to the new land where they're going to build their home, and they're traveling. They spend that night in the forest, and there's all the animal noises.
Right.
The next night they come to a settlement, and they go to the settlement and knock on a door, and there's a family that allows them to stay at the house. And there is some hospitality there. We see that they let them stay, but we find that there's no love in the house.
And the father says that. He says there is no love in this house. And then he and Sarah are talking about the house that they are going to live in. And he says, there are people in this world who do not help others along the way, Sarah, while there are those who do. In our home, all will be treated with kindness. Always, Sarah.
Yeah.
So he's pointing out to her that house that they stayed in that settlement is not going to be, it wasn't a home.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not going to be the kind of home that they were going to have. So he understands clearly that a home is made up of love and security and kindness in a way that is contrasted with this house in the settlement that they stayed in.
That's right.
And he's imparting this value that we help people, that we, with a spirit of generosity, whereas, they welcomed them, but it felt more dutiful than hospitable. It didn't feel like a sense of generosity.
Right. Or true wanting them to be there.
That's right.
Even, it's like you can stay. But then he leaves Sarah in a home that is where she is able, even though there's a language barrier there,
Yeah.
and they are still able to become friends, and they become very attached to her. And they're sad when she leaves, when her dad
Tall
comes
John
to get
calls
her.
him daughter. Calls her daughter.
Calls her daughter. And so that is I love the way this contrasts those two kinds of homes.
That's right.
And then we have the last home,
Yeah.
which is the reuniting of Sarah's family and their home. And we need to talk about the cloak.
Right, the cloak is such a great symbol in this because when we're talking about having courage, there were many things in Sarah's experience that encouraged that courage. Things can't be born. Things have to be nurtured. Courage has to be nurtured, and I think the fact that she had encouragement from a loving family, and her mother, it told her how valuable she would be in helping her father, and gave her with a hug and gave her this cloak, which was sort of a physical symbol of courage that she would wrap herself in whenever she felt lonely or scared. So she had fond memories. She had the encouragement of her kind parents. She had this physical representation of courage when she needed it, which many children do. They have, their loveys or whatever.
Their blanket.
That's exactly
their
right.
Animal.
She had the Bible. So she had exemplars of courage. And so, in the evening she would read stories of the Bible, and, and she had these exemplars. And so she had fortification and encouragement to be courageous when she wasn't, and she had this mantra, keep up your courage.
Yes.
Keep up your courage. So she had this mantra that she would repeat to herself. And so, I think that is important, that we have to encourage these virtues and these values, and they can be strengthened and they can be lost. And so that those things helped her along.
I loved it that you said, talked about her reading the Bible stories, which takes us right back to prairie school, and the value of the fact that she could read.
That's
and
right.
how then she was able to use those stories then to encourage her and to really solidify her courage.
And of course, her faith. That she, had a strong faith and prayed and, depended on God in uncertain circumstances. That is a tremendous fortification. And so I love that is a central theme in this book.
I do too.
And what are some of the ways that the author is communicating this? So if we can maybe transition to looking at this book at a literary level, what's going on here? What are you pointing out to students?
Well, you have the idea of the symbol of the cloak.
Right.
And at the beginning, Sarah's called to be brave, and her mother literally wraps her in this cloak.
Yeah.
And so then when she's at the home and she's feeling nervous, she gives the cloak away, and then she asks for it right back because she has sort of lost her footing and she needs that security. And then at the end of the book, when her mother returns and they're in their happy new home, she hangs the cloak up on the wall. And she's basically saying, this is a new season and I don't need this particular security. She's demonstrating her confidence in her setting at this point. So this is a great opportunity to teach a young student about symbols. This cloak is more than just a coat.
I think this might be the first time we see such a significant symbol.
Right.
That's so obvious.
That's obvious.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I think that's one. The repetition, there's a lot of repetition.
Yeah.
And just the different homes.
I think so.
Is
think that's
central
key.
to it.
Yeah.
I think the title of the book, The Courage of Sarah Noble, is the theme that runs throughout that you would want to point out.
Yeah.
I think these themes in this book are so obvious but it's also themes that we are going to hit over and over and over. And I feel like this is a perfect second grade level of dealing with these themes. I think she's done a beautiful job with bringing out all the themes in the context of just a sweet little story about a little girl. Also the animals, we talked in Animal Folktales about the relationship between people and animals, and that runs throughout here, is their respect for the wild and respect for wild animals, but also appreciation when she begs her father not to shoot the deer because it's beautiful. And we start having that conversation about killing for food. We've got to eat. I mean, that was survival for them. Or versus just killing for the sake of killing. And she appreciated, even though she was afraid of the wolf, she still appreciated the beauty of the wild creature.
And you also get this mirroring again in this story. So you see father being a good man and going and tending to his horse in the evening, which you see in all of, so many of the books in the grammar school, is that, taking care of your animals well. And then you actually see, you see this so often in the children as they're maturing and as they're growing, modeling and mimicking their parents' behavior. And so at the end of the story, I love to see Sarah, putting down Arabella, is it Arabella, her doll?
Her doll.
Yes, and so she's tucking her in and she's, encouraging her in the evening. And so then she's doing the exact same thing that her good mother would do for her. And so you can see this mirroring, which is, I think sort of a recognition of growth and maturity in the child, is that they're trying to grow in wisdom and maturity.
And speaking of Arabella the doll, this is a beloved doll that she had left behind. And it's the first thing after she reunites with her mother. Is the first thing she asks is, did you bring Arabella? And it says she was almost afraid to ask the question. So, she had her cloak, but she had lost her beloved doll and waited all this time. It wasn't just her family. The cloak is all she had that was left of her family when her father left. And so it was really important. But then once they reunited, she didn't really need it anymore.
I do want to go back to the theme of houses or home, what makes a home, because I think too you also get the author working in comparison and contrast and helping students identify what's a unifying principle here. Well, in the first house, the people dress like her. They eat at the same kind of table she eats at, and they eat the same kind of food, but there's no love. And it's clear. And her father says that. And she says that. Actually, she says that.
She does.
There's no love there. And then when he leaves, when her father leaves Sarah with Tall John and his family, they wear different clothes. They eat at a different kind of table, and they eat different food. And the author is pointing that out explicitly. But there's love there. And that's the kind of house that she needs to be in, so that when we get to the very end and they finally have built the home, even though she's back with her family, wearing the same kind of clothes, eating the same kind of food, it's the love principle that's there. That
makes it a home.
That makes it a home.
Right, which seems so obvious and so easy to us. But it is something that a 7-year-old would not necessarily have thought about.
Right.
And so this is bringing all of these things up, what it means to be courageous, what is home really.
Right.
All of these themes then are just nicely woven into this story on their level.